My name is Sara, and the story I am about to tell you happened many years ago, long before I understood how memories become treasures and how one winter trip can change the way you see your life, your family, and even yourself. Back then, I was just a curious girl with a quiet heart, the kind of girl who loved books, winter air, and the silence of early mornings. I remember the day everything began. It was late December. Snow had been falling silently since dawn, spreading across our small town like someone was painting the world white from the rooftops downward. The windows were foggy, my mother was boiling tea, and my younger sister Amina was running circles around the living room as if she had stored the energy of an entire year inside her tiny body. I was sitting near the window with a book when I heard my mother say, "Girls, come here. You need to see this." Amina dashed to her immediately, but I walked slowly, as I always did. When I reached her, she held an envelope in her hand. It looked slightly worn from travel, its color faded, corners dusted with the scent of the mountains. "It's from your aunt," my mother said, and her voice carried a hint of warmth I hadn't heard in a while. My aunt? The one who lived with her family in a wooden house on the hillside? The house I remembered visiting only once when I was very small. My mother opened the letter and began to read. I watched her eyes scan the page, brighten, soften, and then she smiled. The kind of smile that makes your heart curious. She wants us to come, to spend New Year with them in the mountains. Amina gasped dramatically. I simply stared at the letter. The mountains, the hills, the quiet forests. It had been years since I last felt snow the way it feels in the mountains, untouched, heavy, ancient, magical. A strange flutter stirred in my chest. "Are we going?" Amina asked, practically vibrating. My mother looked at us with a playful, almost secretive smile. "If you girls want to." Amina screamed yes. Me? I didn't scream. I just whispered quietly to myself, "I want to go back." I had no idea how that single decision would shape the most unforgettable winter of my life. The next 2 days were filled with noise, chaos, packing, and Amina misplacing everything she touched. She kept mixing her clothes with snacks, accidentally stuffing a scarf into the sugar container, and trying to bring her entire set of toy animals. I was the opposite. I neatly folded my sweaters, packed 2 notebooks, and sharpened 3 pencils, even though I knew I wouldn't need that many. But I liked being prepared. Being prepared made me feel safe. Every now and then, I felt a shiver of excitement. Not fear, just anticipation. A quiet wish I couldn't quite understand. On the final night before we left, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the winter wind tapping against the windows. I wondered what the hills would look like now. Would I remember the path to the small stream behind their house? Would the trees still lean the same way toward the valley? And deep inside, I wondered, why does this trip feel important? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. The morning we left, the world was still waking up. The sky was pale, the sun barely rising, and frost glittered on the tree branches like tiny diamonds. The car heater was broken, so Amina and I sat bundled up like 2 traveling snowmen. My mother kept rubbing her hands together, and every time she breathed out, the car windows fogged slightly. Despite the cold, I was wide awake. The further we drove, the more the world changed. Buildings grew fewer, trees grew taller, and the roads curved like sleepy snakes through white valleys. Amina pressed her face against the glass. "Look, Sara, look, the hills." I looked. My breath caught. The hills rose gently at first, soft, snow-covered, peaceful. Then they grew taller, sharper, crowned with pine forests and rocky ridges. They looked quieter than I remembered, but somehow alive. When we finally reached the foot of the mountain road, the tires crunched over frozen gravel, and I recognized the narrow path that led upward. Memories came rushing back, running through ankle-deep snow, chasing wood smoke that drifted from chimneys, seeing the first stars appear on cold evenings. When we reached my aunt's house, I felt something warm spread through my chest. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was belonging. The house stood proudly on the slope, made of dark old wood and covered with thick layers of snow. Smoke rose from its chimney in soft gray spirals. The air smelled like pine, winter, and something sweet baking inside. Before the car even stopped, the front door swung open and my aunt rushed out, bundled in a giant coat and waving her hands. Amina flew out of the car and threw herself into her arms. I followed more calmly, but when my aunt hugged me, I felt myself melt a little. Her hugs were like warm blankets. My uncle stepped out next, smiling gently, holding a tray of steaming cups. "Hot tea for cold travelers," he said. The moment I sipped it, warmth traveled from my tongue down to my heart. We stepped inside, and I felt like I had walked into another world. Soft rugs, wooden beams, the crackle of fire, and the smell of cinnamon drifting from the kitchen. My cousin wasn't there. He was studying abroad that year. But there was someone else, someone I didn't remember. A boy, probably around my age. Quiet eyes, messy hair, hands that looked like they had spent more time building things than holding a phone. He gave a shy smile. "I'm Timur," he introduced himself. "I help around here during winters." I nodded politely. I didn't know then how important this boy would become to the story I'm telling. The next morning, I woke up earlier than everyone else. I put on my coat and stepped outside. The air was cold enough to bite my cheeks, but I loved it. The sky was sharp blue, and the snow shone so brightly it looked like someone had sprinkled crushed glass across the ground. I walked down the slope where the wind formed tiny waves across the snow. The pine trees whispered softly, swaying gently. Everything felt familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. Amina came stumbling out behind me, half asleep, half excited. "Sara, wait for me!" We wandered farther, following the faint path that led behind the house. That's when I saw it. An old wooden shed tucked between two tall pines, partially hidden by snowdrifts. I didn't remember it being there. Amina shivered. "That place looks creepy." Maybe it did, but to me, it looked secretive, like it held a story waiting to be told. I stepped closer until I heard a soft creak. The door had moved slightly with the wind. Amina grabbed my sleeve. "Don't open it. What if something scary jumps out?" I almost laughed, almost, because when I touched the door, I felt something, a strange feeling, not danger, something else, curiosity. But before I could open the door, we heard someone calling, "Breakfast!" We ran back, and the shed remained closed for now. After breakfast, we played outside with Amina while my aunt prepared lunch. Timur was chopping wood nearby, focused and quiet, like he enjoyed the rhythm of it. At one point, while digging in the snow to make a small fort, I noticed unusual footprints along the side of the shed. They were small, round, not like any animal I knew. I knelt down and traced one with my finger. It was deep, perfectly shaped, almost like a circle with tiny lines around it. Amina whispered, "Sara, what made that?" I didn't know, but someone or something had been there. Timur approached us. "You girls okay?" I pointed at the prints. "Do you know what these are?" He stared at them longer than necessary. Then he shrugged. "Probably just rabbits." But his voice lacked honesty. He knew something. I could feel it. And I decided right then I would find out what. That afternoon, my curiosity became unbearable. I returned to the shed alone. The wind blew softly, carrying the smell of pine needles. I placed my hand on the cold wooden door. It opened, slowly, quietly, as if welcoming me. Inside, the air was dusty but warm. I expected old tools or boxes, but instead, I found something that made my breath hitch. A large wooden structure, half-finished, beautifully carved. A sleigh. A big one, not a toy, but not the size of a horse-drawn sleigh either. It looked like it was meant for children, but built with the craftsmanship of someone who took their work seriously. There were paintbrushes scattered around, jars of colored paint, metal pieces, wooden shavings. Someone had been working here recently. Amina peeked in behind me. "Sara, what is all this?" I whispered, "I think someone is building something for New Year." But who? And why? Before I could think further, I heard footsteps behind us. Timur. He stood at the door, looking slightly embarrassed. "You weren't supposed to see this yet," he said quietly. I frowned. "So it's yours?" He nodded slowly. "I'm building it for New Year's Eve, for the kids in the village, but I needed help." Amina beamed. "We can help." I didn't say anything at first. I just looked at the sleigh. The carving was delicate. Stars, swirls, snowflakes. This wasn't just a sleigh. It was art. I turned to him. "If you want help, I'm in." He looked relieved, almost grateful. And that was how the adventure began. The next few days were the kind that shape themselves into memories without even trying. Every morning after breakfast, Amina, Timur, and I went to the shed. We worked until our fingers were numb from the cold, until our cheeks were red, until our laughter warmed the walls more than the tiny stove in the corner. Timur taught us everything: how to sand wood gently, how to measure pieces accurately, how to paint in even strokes. Amina spilled paint 3 times, once on the floor, once on her scarf, and once on Timir's sleeve. We all laughed until our stomachs hurt. For me, it wasn't just fun. There was something deeper. I had never built anything real before, never worked on something that would bring joy to others, never felt this kind of teamwork. One afternoon, while painting small golden stars on the sleigh's sides, I asked, "Why do you build it alone every year?" Timur looked at the paintbrush in his hand. "Because I want the younger kids in the village to have something special, something magical." I stared at him for a long moment. He wasn't just shy, he was kind. And kind people are rare. The next few days were the kind that shape themselves into memories without even trying. Every morning after breakfast, Amina, Timur, and I went to the shed. We worked until our fingers were numb from the cold, until our cheeks were red, until our laughter warmed the walls more than the tiny stove in the corner. Timur taught us everything: how to sand wood gently, how to measure pieces accurately, how to paint in even strokes. Amina spilled paint 3 times, once on the floor, once on her scarf, and once on Timur's sleeve. We all laughed until our stomachs hurt. For me, it wasn't just fun. There was something deeper. I had never built anything real before, never worked on something that would bring joy to others, never felt this kind of teamwork. One afternoon, while painting small golden stars on the sleigh's sides, I asked, "Why do you build it alone every year?" Timur looked at the paintbrush in his hand. "Because I want the younger kids in the village to have something special, something magical." I stared at him for a long moment. He wasn't just shy, he was kind, and kind people are rare. We waited until everyone fell asleep. Then we sneaked into the attic. The air was cold, filled with the smell of old wood and forgotten summers. We crawled across the beams, laughing quietly every time Amina bumped her head or Timur whispered, "Careful!" Finally, we reached the small hatch that connected to the shed's upper storage area. Timur pushed it open and a wave of cold air rushed in. Inside, the sleigh sat unfinished, waiting for us. We worked together, whispering and giggling as wind roared outside like a giant beast. Timur explained what was left: the front bar, the metal runners, the final coat of paint. Amina brought the lantern closer. Its warm light made the sleigh glow like magic. We worked for hours, sharing stories, ideas, dreams. At one point, Amina asked, "Do you think the storm will stop by tomorrow?" Timur looked at me before answering. "It has to." And I felt the same hope in my own heart. When I opened my eyes the next morning, everything was silent, peaceful. The blizzard had passed. The world outside shone brighter than I had ever seen it. Snow covered everything like a blanket of light. Pine trees sparkled. Icicles glowed like crystals. We rushed outside. When we reached the shed, sunlight poured through the cracks of the door. Inside, the sleigh waited for us, unfinished but close, very close. Timur smiled at us. "Let's finish it." We worked faster than ever, coating the final layer of paint, attaching the last metal piece, wrapping small lantern lights along the edges. And when we stepped back, I felt my throat tighten. It was beautiful. not just because of the colors or the carvings. It was beautiful because we built it together.